It's an honor to be here and speak on this panel. I'd like to talk about geographies of the network society that are excluded. Geographies typically characterized as bottom of the pyramid by non-inhabitants. Geographies that are home to those who we are told are waiting to be empowered by the telecoms. These are communities in the margins who matter all too little to the networks of value. I would like to speak to the question of the governance of digital spaces from the standpoint of these vast regions, these communities. Of everything I've heard in the highly elevating forums of discussion in these couple of days here, I have been most intrigued by Professor Castle's assertion that all theories we are taught about cultural imperialism are no longer true, since we see a cultural domination of multiple competitive business networks. The intellectual import of the redundancy of cultural imperialism agitated my limited wisdom, setting off a series of thoughts and making me wonder if we are to feel somewhat better, somewhat relieved that the multiplicity of cultural hegemonies was not as bad as the era of cultural imperialism. I was then reminded of a discussion I was witness to on a mailing list that I am part of. This was a discussion on grassroots communities and why a special lens on the local may be needed as we debate digital dispossession. As we know, these are times when categories can be really elusive. So someone on the list stepped in and said, the local need not be the geographic local. Local is about locus, the locus of control. And this seemed to me somehow making epistemic sense. Going from here and reclaiming situatedness in these times of mobile society, I would like to focus a bit more on the local, a region that we are told by scholars of globalization is that in which the global is appropriated and reproduced. I would like to come back to the question of cultural imperialism a bit later. For now, I would like to ask if the local, even as a heuristic, can be treated as a prior category, one that we may want to examine closer. In our politics and practices, we seem to take globalism as an inherent value. We like to see ourselves as global citizens. I think we need to unpack globalism. Examine if this indeed is a neutral value or if it is a worldview that locates people differentially in hierarchies of social, economic, and political locations. Gandhi professed localism. He was not a bigot, but he conceptualized local living as intrinsic to social belonging and political agency. For Gandhi, the local was important. Localism was not nationalism. In Gandhi's notion of Swaraj, the local was the autonomy of people, the locus for self-determination. Today, the apparatuses of the network society seem to annihilate those with no claim to globalism. The internet has emerged as the unitary force behind the creation and proliferation of contemporary media. It is the new organizing force enabling the centralization of power and holding the promise of emancipation, we are told, for the unfree. The material semiotic underpinnings of the internet are very important to understand. Today, 13 of the 30 largest publicly traded corporations in the US are internet-related companies, and most are monopolies. Their power beyond the jurisdiction of the US is immense. This consolidation in no small part owes its strength to global techno and data architectures. This is why, if not for many other important reasons, the governance of the internet is a vital issue. As an artifact with an open global architecture, the internet has been molded by the technical community with a worldview described as Californian ideology that Mike also referred to, that combines radical individualism, libertarianism, and neoliberal economics. It's a curious hybrid of the new left and new right, based on their shared interest in anti-statism, the counterculture of the 1960s, and techno-utopianism. Internet governance has been a legacy of this ideological worldview, rooted as it is in what has come to be known as multi-stakeholderism. In 2013, that's last year, IT for Change, my organization, undertook a discourse analysis, a critical discourse analysis of the Internet Governance Forum 2012. The IGF is a multi-stakeholder space for policy dialogues on internet governance. We plowed through the transcripts of the 6 main sessions of the IGF 2012. We did a detailed reading of these, pegging our inquiry to the systematic tracing of the word access. We trailed the word access and looked at the context in which it was uttered. From the 95 utterances that we examined, we were able to conclude that the dominant discourse in the IGF is that of the market. Social policy is relegated as residue. Development is signified as a paradigm of catch-up post-growth, and individuals using the internet as invoked as consumer users whose preoccupation is with assimilation into a gadget and applications-centric market. The discussions on access focused heavily on the rate of return on infrastructure, and concerns like linguistic diversity found mention within the overarching idea of demand and supply. We also found that the internet was expressed as a multivalent, abstract, global phenomenon, and access also alluded to in a global sense. Whereas, curiously, governance was seen as confined to the realm of the national. The global universal was valorized as the scale and space of value linked to the ideal of openness. On the whole, excessive regulation by governments, by states, was seen as the main threat to rights of privacy and security, and not so much the omnipresent surveillance machinery of telecom and internet companies. Regulation in its varied context of utterances was assumed to be value-loaded, something that is deemed undesirable. The discursive process of the Internet Governance Forum thus emphasizes an openness through multi-stakeholder dialogue. Its neoliberal leanings produce, reproduce, and legitimize a politics of recognition, sidestepping the political economy questions of governance in its redistributive sense. The multi-stakeholderism of the IGF is a peculiar form of democracy. If the poor from the back of beyond of Telangana are unable to be on the multi-stakeholder table, especially if they are not yet hallowed users of the internet, their worldviews about what the internet means for their own localities, whether they can dream of high-speed internet, and how they may be able to use it for their socio-economic, civic political advancement, will not be heard. Of course, they are invited to participate in the IGF in debates virtually. So why am I sharing this research with you? The structures of the world are being fashioned by the structures of the network society. Chaos and decentering inherent to network age architectures have birthed new forms of subordination and expropriation, giving rise to what we know is called network age capitalism. The powers that be in international political economy have increasingly sought to align global regimes of technology to global regimes of trade, finance, and intellectual property to further the status quo. The arena of technology is also marked by posturing by powerful countries and corporations to perpetuate the governance deficit at the global level. The structural aspects of a network society also make power very, very diffuse. This diffusion of power corresponding to network age disorganization paradoxically works to create constellation of actors bound together by the ideology of globalism. In this global class, corporates organize big society production through small world networking. Nation-states come together with global corporations in an oligarchic nexus, and civil society networks attempt to consolidate their legitimacy. Digital technology provides the material semiotic basis to also complete neoliberal capitalism's key project, that of taming politics. So coming back to Professor Castell's assertion, cultural imperialism as we knew it may have metamorphosed. It may have died as an idea only to mutate into a multiplicity of cultural dominations. As somebody said, culture is no longer the romantic or the modernist resistance to capitalist civilization. It has instead become integrated thoroughly into the system of commodity production and circulation. Culture is commodity, and commodity is culture. But imperialism? Imperialism lives on. It lives in the physical spaces that are carved out and shared by the global class. It emerges as a postmodern creation in fluid formations of a neo-colonial model in network society. India is a great example of this, with an immense concentration of wealth, tight networks of favor between politicians and powerful corporations, and the capture of public assets for private gain. The single most significant fact about network society imperialism, as James Petrus, scholar activist who has written prolifically about Latin America and West Asia, says, in all of its manifestations, whether old US imperialism, revived European and Japanese imperialism, or newly emerging Chinese imperialism, is the redivision of the world. We are in the midst of a major struggle among the major and minor, old and new imperialisms to seize control of regions, regimes, energy, and strategic resources through wars, unilateral and multilateral, regional or bilateral free trade agreements, military alliances, and economic associations. Giving the example of Latin America, Professor Petrus says that so far the carving up of Latin America proceeds through the very legitimate channels of elected petty bourgeoisie politicians and not through wars or ethnic separatist movements. Network society imperialism reproduces through discursive structures that co-opts aspirants vying to be part of the global class, who then become its foot soldiers. An article written recently talks about how plurilateral agreements among developed countries have remained the dominant global governance model in the internet arena. And as in the case of the Indian telecom and internet industry, employees of MNCs have consistently cornered the space for discussion, seeking to propagate the thesis that the multi-stakeholder model advocated globally by the multinational internet and telecom majors resonates in India as well. In most debates in internet governance, nation-states of the global south are cast as authoritarian and anti-democratic. The architectures of technology and data are the two meta layers of global society that will rearrange social reality, economic, social, cultural, and political in the next few decades. These are controlled by powerful nations, the US in particular, and powerful corporations. Network society globalism is heedless. Its recklessness complements disorganized neoliberal capitalism and its masculine romance of the free, unencumbered, self-governing individual. Its greatest obstacle is the national, the site where the dispossessed struggle to make visible the extreme alienation of the local, to claim rights and to assert their citizenship. The reality of the nation-state is not nice for the globalist class, certainly not nice for their imperialist masters. Today, the biggest task is to visibilize, extricate from obscurity questions that are less sexy, questions that correspond to a progressive localism through which a meaningful globalism can be reconstituted. It is upon the revival of the autonomous local alone that we can build a true culture of sharing, one where sharing is not a commodity. And these are questions that come out of community struggles to save the publicness of knowledge and protect the last trenches from where people's political voices can be asserted. The little that I know from having been associated with the information centers we assist Dalit women to run in the rural hinterland of Mysore city is that the information center for these women is a lifeline. It makes applying for job cards under the National Scheme for Employment Guarantee much easier. It helps them with their data needs. It helps them to build evidence to appeal or to even confront the establishment for bringing big change to the village, to show how there are enough children in the village for the government to set up the local Anganwadi or the childcare institution. It enables them to record their stories and send it digitally for radio broadcast. There is little titillation in such stories for the global news market, but it's critical for the local public sphere. It's critical that these women have ownership and control over their data and their information processes. As Robin Jeffrey, Canadian media researcher who's been writing on India, says so beautifully, today's users of iPads and iPhones are unlikely to go a-Googling for such accounts of village development. It may be, he says, easy to be small in these digital times, but small is fragile, vulnerable, and dangerous. Yes, it is. one of our Dalit women partners in the information center in Bharatwadi village, who fought tooth and nail to bring the information center to the Dalit colony, died under strange circumstances days after the inauguration. Information power is dangerous, and the local mafia knows that only too well. We still do not know how Jayamma died. Network society incursions on the local are far-reaching. They manifest in many ways. Until June 20th, 2014, if you visited the Wikipedia entry on Bhavri Devi, a women's rights Dalit activist who was raped for taking on child marriage in an upper caste community in a village in Rajasthan, you would see a narrative that was extraordinarily misogynistic. Women's rights organizations have since then sought to rewrite the narrative, bringing justice to Bhavri's account of the story. So, how can localism claim information power? How can it infiltrate the open spaces of the global? How can we bring value to the local that challenges and pushes back the hegemony of global networks of value? How do communities who have lost their autonomy reclaim their autonomy? And how can internet governance enable this? The task for governance is to create new social meanings around the internet, the meaning that women from our information center derive. Today, India's huge optic fiber networks are lying unused. Billions of dollars of universal service obligation funds lie unutilized. But with respect to rural connectivity, we are asked to wait for a business model. The anarchist within me asks, why can't we just leave computers there, give free public access, put the machines there, bring a wire, integrate this with the innumerable government programs for youth, for farmers, for women, for adult literacy, build a local knowledge ecosystem, develop a pedagogy for appropriation by the most marginalized, dump the business model. Our policy myopia has also destroyed, network neutrality, especially with respect to the governance of mobile telephony. In an ongoing research on the internet in India, IT for Change has found that rural youth whose primary mode of connectivity is the mobile phone do not use the word internet. They just use the word Facebook as a synonym. Why? Because they get Facebook free with their data plans. The death of network neutrality portends the death of the dreams of local participation in the global information society. Why can't the policy process incorporate conditions in licensing? Say, reserve 5% of spectrum for community radio and access to public services. The meaning and value of network society citizenship is shaped by a reflected global value, where the local is systematically and callously abandoned to the extractive devices of the dominant players. The solution, of course, is political. We need public policies that ensure the use of open standards, net neutrality, and equitable opportunities for access. We also need commons initiatives through community-driven forms of governance for the application layers, like free software, and service layers, such as open archives, local knowledge repositories, etc. What community initiatives tell us is that the governance of digital spaces must guarantee and proceed from an alternative economics. They tell us that governance is about creating architectures for new cultures that restore to the local a modicum of reality that has been taken away, new cultures that place the marginalized at the center, and about old ideologies where everything that matters does not have to be on sale. Thank you.